Hello, everybody. We're doing our Bible study, and we're up to the first book of First Chronicles, chapter 1. This is a new book we're reading. It's the last book of the original covenant, also known as the Old Testament. Please look at the introduction I did for this book, First Chronicles, previous to this, which explains more about the book in great detail and what we're going to be reading. And also the idea that there's no two books of the Bible, that there's one book. And we need to separate that book, that page that separates the old from the new covenant, or the original from the renewed. Also, keep in mind that most Bibles you read today will not have First Chronicles as or Second Chronicles as the first and last books of the Old Testament. They'll be more in the beginning after Kings, I believe, or Samuel. But in the correct chronological order, it will come towards the at the end of the original covenant. And when you have a good scripture in order, that's one great way to know that the writers knew what they were doing. So let's just briefly get into this, and let's open up in prayer, and then we're going to read First Chronicles. And thank you for being here with me every day to go over the Bible. And these are the last two books of the Old Testament. And once we've gotten through this, we've went through every book of the Old Testament, meaning you can go to my website anytime. And if you want to see what I'm reading for a particular chapter or verse, you just go there and it'll be there. So praise Yah, praise Yah. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kivo, Mahuto Leolam Vaed. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. And you shall love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And have these words which I command you this day be upon your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you retire and when you rise. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and let them be frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. Okay, we're going to be reading this book right now, and praise Yah for his holy word, this record we have of our history, the genealogies of Israel. And this is what the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles discuss. It talks about the family line and the history line, the ancestry of the nation. And you should know this because you are part of this nation. And it starts not with the nation of Israel. It starts all the way in Genesis with the creation of man, which you go back to. We are descendants in this as well. The tribes of Israel it gets into, and then it returns the people who return from the exile to Babylon, which we just read in our previous book. So this is the beginning, the first 9 chapters of what we're going to be discussing here. You got Israel's history, Yahweh's people, then it gives an emphasis on David the king, and then the worship and the priest. It says in this little brief introduction, you can go back and see the main introduction in a moment. It says, these genealogies are the official family records of the nation of Israel. They give us an overview of the history of Yahweh's work from creation through the captivity of his people. These records served to teach the exiles returning to Babylon about their spiritual heritage and a nation, and to inspire them to renew their faithfulness to Yahweh. Although these lists show the radical history of the Jewish people, they contain a spiritual heritage for every believer. We are a part of the community of faith that has existed from generation to generation since the dawn of man. So we look at the ancestry of the nation from Adam to Noah. And remember this, I think a lot of Bibles today erroneously say the Jewish people or Judah instead of Israel. And you have to understand, Judah was one of the tribes of Jacob, which was Israel. But Adam, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Adam, and everyone, they weren't Jewish. They weren't from the tribe of Judah. There was no tribe of Judah before that. And people say, well, those are Yahweh's people. Those are the people he came to. He came to Israel. And Israel is not only a place on a map. Israel is means you're a believer. You are Israel. When you believe in Yeshua, our Messiah, you are now part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And you might say, well, that makes you feel good and everything else, but you also got to remember that puts you in a responsible position to follow the instructions and guidelines that Israel was called to follow in the scriptures. So this is your ancestry, not just, as some Bibles say, Judah's ancestry, but it talks about the line here of Judah, and it does leave the line of the northern kingdom of Israel out, and it talks about the southern kingdoms of Jerusalem specifically in this book, and gives the history of these. So that is an emphasis on this book here. So unlike the book of like Kings, where it talked about the line of the different kings, this talks about the different people and the line of David. So it says, this record of names demonstrates that Yahweh is interested not only in nations, but also individuals. Although billions of people have lived since Adam, Yahweh knows and remembers the face and name of each person. Each of us is more than a name on a list. We are special persons whom Yahweh knows and loves. As we recognize and accept his love, we discover both uniqueness and individuals and our solidarity with the rest of the family. So we're going to be reading a long list of names here in this book. It says here in the One New Man Bible, the Chronicles were the last book of the Bible to be written around 350 BC. Ezra had come back from Jerusalem in 458 BC, and Nehemiah in 444. And they came with this list to remind people of the names. And that's what we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading a lot of names here in these first 9 chapters. And like I said, it's important to read the names and understand them. This long list of names was compiled after the people of Judah and the southern kingdom were taken captive to Babylon. As the exiles looked forward to the day when they would return to their homeland, one of their biggest fears is that the records of their heritage would be lost. The Jewish placed great importance upon their heritage because each person wanted to be able to prove that he was a descendant from Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. Only then could he enjoy the benefits of the special blessing Yahweh promised to Abraham and his descendants. And you can see more about those blessings in Genesis 12 and Genesis 17. This list reconstructed the family tree for both Judah and the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom, before their captivity, served as proof for those who claimed to be Abraham's descendants. There is more to this long genealogy than meets the eye. It holds importance for us today because it supports the original covenant promise that Yeshua, the Messiah, would be a descendant of Abraham and David. This promise is recorded in Genesis 12, 1-3, and 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 to 13. Adam's story and the profile are found in Genesis, and Noah's story, the profile found in Genesis as well. So we're going to get in from the beginning. This is, and this I can't emphasize how important this is because it's not just names we're reading here, but even today, where there's so many websites out now that talk about family lines and different names, and people are paying money to spit in a jar to get your DNA to find out and record your history as far as back as possible and putting together family trees. How much more important to put this family tree here together and understanding these. So we start off in verse 1. The descendants of Adam were Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Melathu, Jared, and Enoch. Now, eventually we're all descendants of Adam, right? But, in this book, we're going to hear some names that we've heard before and that have been spoken about, but we're going to see some history of some names that we haven't heard about. It says Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. The sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So these are all recorded in the book of Genesis. The biblical genealogy may skip several generations. These lists were not meant to be extensive or exhaustive, but to give an adequate information about the various family lines. Verse 5, the descendants of Japheth. So these are Noah's children now, because they came off the boat, remember? And then everyone was starting over again. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Mali, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elishah, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. And, a lot of people often say, where'd all these people come from? And now we're getting more of an idea of this. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mariz, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sapa, Riphath, and Septica. The descendants of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan, and Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Nimrod was also mentioned in Genesis 10. Now, I previously in the other book read about the names of the people that came out of Babylon or captivity after they were taken away into Babylon. And that was an interesting list. I personally find this list of names, even though they're hard to pronounce, more exciting, because this is the genealogy of the line. I mean, both lists are important, but this one is I like this one a lot. So verse 11, it says Mizraim was the ancestor of Ludicus, Amorites, Lebedevis, the Nebuchadnezzar, and verse 12, Patharis, Costalis, and Catharis, of whom the Philistines came. And it says the Philistines had been Israel's consistent enemy from the days of Judges. King David finally weakened them, and by this time they were no longer a threat. And I just love history, and I just love learning this and seeing this here. So in verse 13, Canaan's oldest son was Dedan, the ancestor of Dedan. Canaan was also ancestor to the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Gezerites, Hivites, Amorites, Kenites, Abarites, Zemarites, and Hemulites. And as you know, many of these were Israel's enemies as Israel was trying to survive. And it says here in a note, Canaan was the ancestor of the Canaanites who inhabited the promised land, also called Canaan, before the Israelites entered under Joshua's leadership. Yahweh helped the Israelites drive out the Canaanites, a wicked and idolatrous people. The land's name was then changed to Israel. The book of Joshua tells the story. And it's not a story made up by man. It's a story that Yahweh has created from the beginning of time in his plan of who is going to be where, what, when, and how. That's what we have to understand. Now we see the descendants of Shem. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Ephex, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gather, and Mash. Apatad was the father of Shelah. Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, which means division. For during his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. And it says here for the note in verse 19. At one time, everyone spoke a single language, but some people became proud of their accomplishments and gathered to build a monument to themselves, the Tower of Babel. The building project was brought to an abrupt conclusion when Yahweh caused the people to speak different languages. Without the ability to communicate with one another, the people could not be unified. Yahweh showed them that a great effort was useless without him. Pride in our achievements must not lead us to conclude that we no longer need Yahweh. And this story is told in Genesis 11, 1-9. So you see here that in the book of First Chronicles, you're going back all the way to the beginning, and that's where it's starting. And it's important to note here that he separated them so they could not communicate with each other. And with technology today, the world is pretty much speaking one language again, and everyone can communicate with each other. And so we have to do it this time without being prideful. And this is a big problem because people are falling for the same trap they fell for back then. So we continue to read here, verse 20. Joktan was the ancestor of Amadad, Shepheth, Hazavath, Jerah. Verse 21, Hazamram, Uzzah, and Deketlel. Obal, and Sheba. Obal, Havel, and Jobab. These were the descendants of Jotan. So this is the family line descended from Shem, Japheth, and Shelah. And we read here, Abraham's story and profile are found in Genesis 11. It's starting. And keep that in mind, because we're going to see here from Abraham. Verse 25, Eber, Peleg, and Ru, Sor, Nahor, and Terah, and Abram later known as Abraham. And now we see the descendants of Abraham. The sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael. These are their genealogical records. And we see the Ishmael story and profile are found in Genesis 16, and it talks about them. The sons of Ishmael were Nebaioth, the oldest, Kedar, Camdel, Mizim, Misabath, Nadam, Massa, Hada, and Tamar. Judah, Nashpath, and Chamath, and these were the sons of Ishmael. Now, when you talk about the sons of Ishmael and you talk about Abraham, and you think about the world on a worldly view and historically and what's going on today in the world with Islam and Christianity and Judaism, this is powerful information right here to see where this all began and the truth about where these things began. And to get a good understanding of this is imperative for us to understand our Creator's plans and what He wanted for our lives and how He wanted these things. The sons of Kertath, Abraham's concubine, were Zemran, Jasan, Maiden, Midian, Ishbak, and Shanu. So we've read in the scriptures about Abraham and Sarah being married, but we didn't see much about Abraham's concubine or hear much about Abraham's concubine. Now you got to remember, at the time back then, it's a little different. The focus on having children and the idea of children were different. I'm not saying it shouldn't be like that today, but people today, they're focused on business and everything else. But back then, they had such a heart to reproduce and recreate. And today, when millions of babies are being destroyed every day, back then, children had a lot more value, it seemed, and so much so. There were concubines. There was multiple marriages and things like this, and everyone has their judgment and a thought about that today. But we need to understand, Abraham had a concubine, as it says here in the history, where Zemran, Jasapha, and Maiden, Isbek, and Shaul. The sons of Jason were Sheba and Dedan. Verse 33: the sons of Midian were Ephod, Ephah, Hanok, Abud, and Eldah. All these descendants of Abraham through his concubine Keturah. So, descendants of Isaac. And now we see here, Israel is another name for Jacob, given to him by Yahweh. It means someone who struggles with Yahweh. Israel, or Jacob's 12 sons, became the nation of Israel. Esau's descendants became the nation of Edom, a consistent enemy of Israel. To learn more about the lives of Isaac and his two sons, Jacob and Esau, read their stories in Genesis 20, 21 to 36 and 46 to 49, and get an understanding of them. But now we're up to the descendants of Isaac. Abraham was the father of Isaac. The sons of Isaac were Esau and Israel. Now the descendants of Esau. The sons of Esau were Eliphaz, Reuel, Jesh, Jelim, and Korah. The descendants of Esau were Taman, Omar, Zepho, Gethem, Keniz, and Amalek, who was born to Tamar. And it says here in 36, Amalek, Esau's grandson, was the son of his father's concubine. He was the ancestor of the wicked tribe known as the Amalekites, the first people to attack the Israelites on their way from to the promised land. You read more about them in Exodus 17. So we're up to verse 37. The descendants of Reuel were Nathan, Zerah, Shamuel, and Misu. So you see such an important understanding of these the generational line here is helping us to understand all who Israel is and how the creation started and the people came to be where they were. Now we look at 38 in the original people of Edom. The descendants of Sarah were Lotan, Zabel, Zebion, Anah, Dashan, Azar, and Distan. The descendants of Lotan were Harti and Harman. Lotan's sister was named Timnah. The descendants of Sheba were Alvin, Metheth, Ebel, Shebol, and Ornim. And the descendants of Zebon were Aya and Anah. The sons of Anah were Dishan. The descendants of Dishans were Haman, Eshben, Ithra, and Karin. The descendants of Izar were Bilhan, Zavan, and Akan. And the descendants of Disan were Uz and Aaron, or Aran. Now we're up to verse 43, rules of Edom. These are the kings who ruled in a land, or rulers of Edom, who ruled in the land of Edom before any king ruled over the Israelites. Why are we given information in this generation line about the descendants of Edom, who were Israel's enemies? Esau, ancestor of Edomites, was Isaac's oldest son, and thus a direct descendant of Abraham. As Abraham's first grandson, he deserved a place in the Jewish records. It was through Esau's marriages to pagan women, however, that the nation of Edom began. This genealogy shows the ancestors of the enemy nations. These were not part of the direct lineage of King David, and thus the Messiah. This listing further identified Israel's special identity and role. So we see this. In verse 43, these are the kings who ruled the land of Edom before the kings ruled. Bela, son of Beor, who ruled from the city of Danabah. When Bela died, Jabob, son of Zerah from Bezrah, became king in his place. When Joab died, Hashem from the land of Tenemites became king in his place. When Hashem died, Hadon, son of Badadad, became king in his place and ruled from the city of Atharim. He was the one who destroyed the Midianite army in the land of Moab. When Hadon died, Samuel from the city of Maskmath became king in his place. And when Samuel died, Shaul from the city of Ramathoth on the river became king in his place. When Shaul died, Baal-Hanan, son of Abar, became king in his place. And when Baal-Hanan died, Hadad became king in his place and ruled from the city of Pu. His wife was Methabah, daughter of Metrod, and the granddaughter of Metzebib. Then Hadon died. The clan leaders of Edom were Timah, Alvin, Jedeth, Obedmah, Ella, Pina, Kenez, Timiz, Bizer, Mazdil, and Aram. These are the clan of the leaders of Edom. Now in chapter 2, we're going to get into the descendants of Israel, and we're going to talk about them. But that was chapter 1 here. And again, good, powerful information. Hopefully we understand and we get. We're going to be reading this book of Chronicles 2. If you didn't already do it, please go back and look at what it says here in the scriptures, the introduction to the book of Chronicles. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this reading. Have a blessed day, and Yahweh be with you. Shalom, shalom.